We'll be doing that in just a moment. But before that, Ugo is going to come and read for us from John chapter 4, verses 1 to 30. Thanks, Ugo.
Now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For the Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water, welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." He told her, "Go call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in the spirit and in truth." The woman said, "I know that the Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I, the one speaking to you, am he." Just then his disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. But no one asked, "What do you want?" or "Why are you talking with her?" Then leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, "Come see a man who told me everything I've ever done. Could this be the Messiah?" They came out of the town and made their way towards him.
Thank you for reading so beautifully. It's a great story, one of my favorite stories, and we're going to look at it. And we've been talking about the London City Mission, And here is our mission. London City Mission, together with churches, shares the good news of Jesus with those least likely to hear it. So this is what we want to do. We want to bring the gospel to those who are least likely to hear that. London City Mission was started in 1835 by David Naismith. David Naismith was passionate for the gospel. He came from Scotland. He started the mission here. He wanted to reach out to the people of London. London has changed so much. Probably if 1835 London was very different, certainly very different than today's London. But the passion in the London City Mission for the gospel remains the same. Because gospel transforms lives. So let's look at the transformational gospel. Gospel transforms lives. Gospel is not just a ticket to heaven. Of course, that is part of it as well. When we believe that Jesus died on the cross for me, my sins are forgiven. Gospel does give assurance that we will be with God in heaven when we die. But that is not the whole function of the gospel. Gospel transforms lives. Now, from top to bottom, every bit of our lives. I've seen gospel transforming many lives. People who are angry when they believe in Jesus become loving. Greedy people become generous. I've seen those sort of transformations in people. People who are unsatisfied spiritually become satisfied when they receive Jesus, because Jesus is bread of life. He is water that quenches thirst. But in gospel, when we take gospel to people, there's so many barriers that we have. We face so many barriers. Harrow is multicultural. Harrow has multi-religious communities. More than 24 languages are spoken in Harrow. And it's not just the words, even expression from one culture to another could differ. We have a missionary from Bulgaria, and one day he said that he was in Sunday service, and when the speaker was speaking, his speaker said, Jesus is Lord, and he was saying things about Jesus, proclaiming Jesus. And every time he did something, he proclaimed Jesus' Lordship, Yoden was shaking his head like this. So this preacher was disturbed, and he thought, why is this man denying Lordship of Jesus? So later on, after the ceremony, he went and he spoke to him. He said, why are you denying Lordship of Jesus? Yoden said, why do you say that? He said, because you're shaking your head. He said, in Bulgaria, this means yes, and this means no. And culturally, body expressions could differ from one culture to another. There's so many barriers that we face when talking to people, interacting with them. Of course, in this story, we notice how Jesus faced and crossed these barriers. So look at some of the barriers that Jesus faced and crossed. Jesus, when it comes to sharing the gospel, he is our model. He is the greatest teacher, example for us. And then we'll extract a few principles, ask, listen, share from Jesus' story. So first, let's look at barriers Jesus faced and crossed. When we see first interaction that Jesus has with this woman, we notice there is a moral barrier that this woman has. The first one is a moral barrier. How do we know that? We notice that the gospel writer gives so many details. He even gives us the time of the day that it is. It says Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. It is about noon. Why give time of the day? There is a reason for that. This woman comes to the well around this time. No woman would come to the well mid-afternoon. In Jerusalem, in Israel, it would have been hot, scorching hot. You would have lost half of your day. They would have come early in the morning when it's cool. So they would have all day to work. And women wouldn't come to the well alone. She's alone as well, indicating that she is not a moral woman. But Jesus faces and crosses this barrier. Other barrier we notice is gender. She's a woman. Just then his disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. But no one asked, what do you want? Or why are you talking with her? Even they are surprised, seeing Jesus talking to this woman. In that culture, men didn't even speak publicly to their wives, let alone a stranger. But Jesus faces and crosses this gender barrier as well. Racial barrier. She's a different race. She's Samaritan. Jesus is a Jew. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciple had gone into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritan. Even there is an editorial comment. Jews do not associate with Samaritans. And this woman is also saying to him, "You're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan. No, we don't have any relationship. Why are you asking me for a drink?" Racial barrier. But Jesus faces and crosses this barrier as well. There is religious barrier as well. "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you're a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." Samaritans had their own worship place. There is a mount called Gerizim, and these people, Samaritans, they worshipped there. Religiously, they were different. Jews didn't accept them as worshipping a true God. Religiously, she is different as well. But Jesus faces and crosses this barrier as well. We can see we face similar barriers that Jesus faced. There are moral issues. Moral might be different here. When we as Christians see what is right, people might not see that as right. So there are moral barriers that we have. Gender barriers. Some cultures, people interact with different genders, others don't. Racial barriers. There's so many races all around us. Multicultural, multi-racial society. And we find that there's so many barriers. Jesus gives us a great example how we can cross these barriers. How can we cross these barriers? Jesus is our model. So, if we come to this, one of the skills we teach is initiating spiritual conversation. How do we initiate spiritual conversation? Of course, Jesus is our model. Jesus asks, he listens, and he shares. In the New Testament, Jesus asked 135 questions. 135 questions. If we can go to the next slide, please. Yep. Jesus asked 135 questions in the Gospel. Here in John's Gospel alone, he asks 34 questions. Questions are a good way to start a conversation. And we notice that actually, when he is interacting with this woman, he asked her a question, "Will you give me a drink?" making himself vulnerable. He is communicating his need of thirst. Will you give me a drink? There are other times Jesus asks a question where he communicates not his need, but he provides for the needs of others. When he spoke to his disciples, cast out nets. He provides for them by asking, have you caught any fish? And other times, he deals with deep emotional issues of people. He says to Peter, do you love me? Initiating conversation by asking questions. Questions. When we come to people, we ask them questions, and these questions can be good questions to start a conversation. Around Easter time, we were initiating spiritual conversation with people, and that was a good opportunity to ask questions. So one of the questions we asked people was, do you know why Christians celebrate Easter? And I asked many Hindus this question, do you know why Christians celebrate Easter? And I was shocked to notice that none of them knew what Easter was. They knew that Easter is a time when we have 2 weeks break from school. They knew that around Easter time, supermarkets sell Easter eggs, or bunnies, but they didn't know why Christians celebrate Easter. And it was a good opportunity then to share with them why we celebrate Easter. There was a clear opportunity. I talked to loads of families and individuals. Ramesh, one man, when I asked him, do you know why Christians celebrate Easter? And he told me all the things that reason. So I explained to him why we celebrate Easter. Jesus was born, Jesus died on the cross on Good Friday, and then he rose again on Easter Sunday. And that was something new for him. Good questions can bring out philosophy, longings, desire, and we can understand people better. So here are some good examples of good questions. Do you have faith? May I know your opinion about God? What does it mean for you to be a Hindu, Muslim, or whatever? Do you pray where? What does that look like? Do you pray set prayers or whatever comes to mind? Are you very religious, somewhat religious, not really? How do you measure? Does God give you hope or make you feel afraid? Why? Does God seem close or distant? Why? Of course, there are follow-up questions as well. Questions. In the Proverbs it says, next slide please, the purpose of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out. Questions are like a bucket. You can draw water out of a well. Good question would help us understand a person, what they believe, what their desires are, who they are. Questions don't have to be manipulative. Questions shouldn't be threatening. Sometimes we can come up with the wrong question. We might aim to criticize them, and that is not a good building relationship. If we say, for example, if I speak to a Hindu and start with the ridicule attitude that say, why do you believe in idol gods? So that sort of question is not going to build a relationship. So we need to be careful what sort of questions we ask. Let's move on to the next point, listen. listening is important. When we ask a question, listening is very important. Sadly, listening is often not practiced. Recently, around Good Friday, around the coronation, we were helping a church with an outreach event, and this family came to me, and I knew them, and they're from Hindu background. She said to me, "Oh, I'm glad to be away from that woman over there. She just kept talking. She didn't give me a chance to say a word." And so it was so sort of not friendly way of talking. So sometimes when we keep talking and don't listen, other person doesn't appreciate that relationship. So we need to listen, not just talk. Listening is not easy. It's a challenge for all of us. It does take some time to train ourselves, to be patient, to listen. But there is a physical element to that as well. Even when we're listening, we can hear 175 words per minute. We can only listen to 175 per minute. But when it comes to thinking, we can think 2,000 words per minute. So this is according to science and psychology. 175 words per minute when it comes to listening, but thinking is 2,000 words per minute. And that's why it's easy to go into our own thoughts when somebody's talking. We've all been there where we have pretended that we are listening, but in reality, we are in our own thoughts. Why is listening important? Because it helps us understand other people. Stephen Covey says, "Seek first to understand, then to be understood." Seek first to understand, then to be understood. When we understand people, we'll connect with them. It is important in any relationship, either as a family member, husband, wife, children, listening to each other, understanding each other. Because when we understand, emotionally and in many other ways as well. Again, according to science and psychology, next slide please, there are 27 types of listenings. We're not going to go through all 27 right now, but one of the listenings is reflective listening. And here we notice that Jesus is doing that here, reflective listening. When Jesus asks her a question, "Will you give me a drink and her husband and come back?" "I have no husband." "You're right when you say you have no husband." He's repeating what she has just said. "You're right when you say you have no husband." He has listened to her. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true. Initially, it sounds like Jesus is exposing her sin and making her uncomfortable. Jesus knows her real need. She's been looking at relationships to fulfill her emptiness, but her emptiness is going to go away by finding Jesus. And later on, actually, when she hears this about her sinful lifestyle, she's trying to deflect attention away from her, and she says, "Oh, I see, you're a prophet. Tell me, is it okay to worship here in Samaria or in Jerusalem?" And Jesus tells her the true worship, what true worship is as well, answering her questions as well. Thirdly, share. Part of initiating spiritual conversation, asking the question, listen, And finally, share. When we share, because listening is not easy, we need to find ways that is more effective to share. Jesus uses here a metaphor, water. He uses picture language. Often we notice Jesus using analogies, stories, metaphors, pictures, and here there is a picture of water and well that Jesus is using. Other places, there is another story in Luke 10, Samaritan man. There is a man, Samaritan man, the parable of a good Samaritan. We notice here, Jesus is asked a question. Jesus asked a question as well. On one occasion, an expert of the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus asked him a question. What is written in the law? He replied. How do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? To that, Jesus tells him a story. Stories are a good way of communicating. They influence people. Notice that Jesus doesn't condemn this man. And Jesus doesn't condemn the woman either, even though she is sinful. Condemnation, criticism doesn't communicate well. If somebody tells us something and then we criticize them, they don't listen to us. So we need to be careful when it comes to sharing. When we go to share our faith with Hindus, they tell us stories. And sometimes the things they mention don't make sense. So one man I was talking to some years ago, Lal, once I asked him, what does Hinduism say about creation? He said, creation, the world is on the back of a turtle. When turtle moves, that's when earthquakes happen. Come on, that doesn't make sense, but I didn't criticize him for that. And another time, I was visiting a family, and they were boiling the milk, warming the milk, and they said that was for their god Ganesh. Oh, that's interesting. I've learned something new. These are some of the ways we can respond to that. That doesn't mean we are affirming their beliefs. We are just affirming a person when we say that's something new I have learned. If we start criticizing, that is not going to help us build a relationship or have opportunities to share our faith. Another, when we go out with the church, a believer came to me and he said, one of the ways when he shares his faith, he doesn't get anywhere with Hindus. Why? Because every time he speaks to them, he says, you need to know that Jesus is the only way. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through Him. Of course, we believe that Jesus is the only way. All other gods are false gods. This is what we believe. But for someone to accept Jesus without really knowing Him, it's not going to happen. We need to introduce Jesus first before people can put their trust in Him. How do we introduce Jesus? Telling about Him, who He is. Jesus is powerful. So we tell stories about Jesus, that Jesus is powerful. One of the stories, my favorite story, is Jesus calming the storm. And I've often told this story to many Hindus when visiting the neighborhood. And I tell you, I asked them, after finding out a little bit about their faith, I asked them, can I tell you, share about Jesus, how Jesus calmed the storm? They say, yes, please go ahead. And then I tell them, Jesus, with words, he said, be still. And the storm calmed down. We need to introduce Jesus first before somebody could come to that point where they see Jesus the only way. For most Hindus especially, Jesus is added as one of their gods, because they believe in millions of gods. They would add Jesus as an additional god to their gods. Once I was visiting one of my friends, I was visiting him for a long time, and he said to me, Emmanuel, come, I'll show you. So he took me to his shrine, and he showed that he had put Jesus' picture among his gods. He said, Jesus is also my God, and I have put him among my gods. Because for most Hindus, it's adding Jesus and then gradually removing their own gods. It doesn't happen that they would just start with Jesus the only way. We need to introduce Jesus first, his miracles, his forgiving stories, loving stories, and this could be done with storytelling. Stories are the best way of communicating. As I said, listening is difficult, but stories could easily communicate really well with us, with the other people. Stories, character, curiosity, concise, conclusive. We notice in this story that this Samaritan man is a character, curiosity, there is a journey, there are lots of things happening. Concise, it's not too detailed, it's not too little, that doesn't make sense, it has a clear conclusion. So this is what communicates really well. Stories, telling people stories. Let me draw it to a conclusion with John Maxwell's saying. John Maxwell says, there are two most important days in our lives. The day we are born, the day we find out why. The day we are born, the day we find out why. The woman at the well found out why. When she recognized who Jesus was, the Messiah, the Savior of the world, what does she do? She leaves the jars and she runs to the town. Why does she leave the jars? We don't know. Is it to facilitate Jesus with a long-awaited drink? Or is it so she can run to the town quickly? I think later might be makes more sense. She runs to the town, she talks to people. She has crossed many barriers now. Before, she was secretly sneaking out of the town, going to the well alone. This time, she is talking to everybody, men and women. She is confessing her sin. She has crossed moral barrier. She has crossed gender barrier. Racial barrier she has crossed as well. She is inviting everybody, come meet a Jew. Jesus is a Jew. She is a Samaritan. She's saying, come meet him. And then she brings everybody. Earlier she had come to the well alone. This time she brings the whole town. She's transformed person, because gospel transforms lives. And this is the gospel we have, the glorious gospel. It is, of course, one of the things when I go to churches, Christians often say to me, look, Emmanuel, it is easy to talk about weather, it is easy to talk about politics, relationships, current affairs, cost of living. When it comes to my faith, I struggle. Of course, Even I've worked with the mission for 24 years. There are times that I have to overcome some of those fears. But we've been commissioned to take the gospel. This is our responsibility. In all my life, only 1 or 2 people have asked me what I believe and why I believe. We do need to initiate spiritual conversations. Otherwise, gospel will not be shared. People are not going to come to us and ask, why do you believe? What do you believe? We need to initiate this conversation. This woman goes to the town, brings them to hear Jesus. We can ask good questions. We can listen really well, connect with people, and then share our own experiences, share stories, share miracles, power stories of Jesus. That will transform lives, because it's not just us ministering. Today we're celebrating Pentecost, and Pentecost means that God, the Holy Spirit, is with us as well. Thank you very much for your support, and thank you for listening.